and descriptions.
During World War II, one man waged a secret and sinister war on behalf of the British government. His name was Sefton Delmer.
He was the king of nasty things, without any doubt, yeah.
He'd witnessed Germany unleash a new weapon, sex propaganda, and volunteered to beat the Nazis at their own game. He ran a shadowy department to print and broadcast pornography. He spread fantasies of rape, perversion, and sex to create divisions among the Germans and shatter enemy morale. To beat tyranny, Sefton Delmer built Britain a state apparatus devoted to lies, smears, and trickery. But he paid a terrible personal price.
Germany calling, Germany calling, Germany calling.
At the start of World War II, the German army unleashed a sex propaganda weapon. In a campaign all but written out of the history books, British troops were subject to an entirely new form of attack, a multimedia assault of sexual smears. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had come up with a ruse to split the British from their French allies. He decided to stir up sexual jealousy between them. In 1940, illustrated leaflets were floated over the Maginot Line for the French to read.
The basic message was quite simple. The poor Frenchman in his trenches is fighting against the German, and the English are drinking champagne with our women. Quite easy.
And the whole concept was to convince the French that while they were fighting and dying at the front, the British were having sex with their women.
What is happening to your wives back home, soldiers? The British are stationed in your villages.
The Where's Tommy leaflet is a really interesting item. It's one of the very first of the see-through leaflets. What the Germans did was basically show a French soldier in his death throes, and when that card was held up to the light, a second card had been cleverly glued behind it, making two pieces. When the light shone through, now a British soldier would be seen back with a French wife or in a French bistro or in a French whorehouse, obviously with semi-dressed young ladies, and they were very popular cards.
Sefton Delmer was a successful tabloid journalist covering the standoff in France for a British paper. When he saw the leaflets, he was intrigued. Troops would normally throw away straightforward propaganda. But Delmer saw that the leaflets with dirty pictures were kept, reread, and passed from man to man. This was a revelation to Delmer. In the years to come, he would use this principle in the service of the British and forge a media empire of leaflets, news sheets, and radio stations across Europe, of greater influence than even the BBC.
See some photos of your grandpa.
Someone who knew why Delmer was perfect for the job of taking on the Germans was his daughter, Selina. Delmer understood the Germans. He'd spent his early childhood in Germany.
There's me, same haircut as you. There's Grandpa. He was really good at telling stories. He used to tell me the most wonderful stories when I was a little girl going to school, just like I tell you. He had a perfect upbringing for the job that he did, because having been an enemy schoolboy in Germany, born in Berlin, and having gone to school in Berlin, and then after his father was interned in Germany, they were sent back to Britain, and he went to St. Paul's, yet again, another enemy schoolboy, because he had come from Germany. So he had a tremendous insight into that side of things, of being an outsider. When he was in Germany, you would have sworn he was German. When he was in Britain, he was very, very British. It made him two people in one package.
Even his marriage straddled two worlds. In 1935, Delmer had married Isabel Nicholas. She was a London artist who had befriended Picasso, Giacometti, and Epstein. Isabel's beauty had inspired them to turn her image into art. Delmer was a foreign correspondent in Paris when war changed their life. Isabel had helped Delmer cultivate the contacts who had given him access to the Nazi elite, including Hitler himself.
He looked at me as though he was Ludendorff about to confer the Iron Cross, you know, and then he said, "Sehr angenehm, sehr angenehm," which means pleased to meet you, dreadful, you know.
France still looked like an imposing castle, but Hitler's political termites had so gnawed away the binding of national unity that the castle was ready to crumble.
When France collapsed, the German propagandists could claim that their sex smears had played a part. Delmer and Isabel fled to London. Germany would now turn its new weapon on Britain, and the British would have to decide whether to stay on the moral high ground or to use sex propaganda themselves. As the war moved from France to England, so Goebbels' propaganda offensive moved from frontline soldiers to civilians, softening them up before any invasion.
Germany calling. Here are the Reichscenter ambush. Station Bremen and Station DXB on the 31-meter stand. You are about to hear our news in English.
Let's go bombing. Oh, let's go bombing. Like United Nations airmen do.
Just as the French had been told they were fighting for the British, so the British were told they were fighting for the Jews.
Another war, another prophet, another Jewish business trick.
And leaflets dropped over London carried the same crude anti-Semitic message.
A lot of dough, a lot of gold, the British Empire feels.
While Delmer was making BBC broadcasts into Germany opposing the Nazis, Berlin was beaming back a more subversive kind of radio.
Workers' challenge! Workers' challenge! Workers' challenge, calling all workers of Britain and Northern Ireland on wavelength 213 metres every night at 8:10.
A radio station calling itself Workers' Challenge declared it was British and was broadcasting from inside Britain, but was in fact German.
Workers in the army, it's not your war, it's the capitalist war. So what will you get out of it? Nothing. All you'll get is a bullet in the head. Perhaps you'll end up with a couple of legs short. For what?
The Germans pretended to be British and pretended to be a real anti-war movement. This use of lies to trick the public won a new name, black propaganda. Delmer was inspired by this dark side. This was the point that the government set up a new unit called the Political Warfare Executive. They turned to Delmer to run its top secret mission, Britain's own black propaganda offensive. Elik Howe would become a key member of Delmer's unit.
First of all, they wanted to achieve something that His Majesty's government could immediately disavow. The whole essence of black was that HM government could deny that it even existed.
In May 1941, Delmer began broadcasting from a requisitioned house in Bedfordshire. His wife Isabel would be recruited to illustrate leaflets. To smear the Germans as sex tourists, images of troops with prostitutes were faked to look like postcards sent home from conquered France. But Delmer wanted to combine the new weapons of sex and black deception. To do so, he turned to radio.
I think we should try a new type of black radio. One that undermines Hitler, not by opposing him, but by pretending to be all for him and his war. Hitler once said to me, "There is an inner pig dog in every man." We must appeal to the inner pig in every German.
Achtung, Achtung, Ihr Gustav Siegfried 1. Ihr Gustav Siegfried 1. Es spricht der Chef.
Dass unsere Propagandaidioten die Situation nördlich von Kirkuk zu klären versuchen, bedeutet nicht, dass die Leute zu Hause in die Hose scheißen müssen.
The voice of Delmer's propaganda was a young German émigré, Paul Saunders. He was to play a fictitious German officer, known only as Der Chef, a loyal and patriotic supporter of Hitler and the war, but hostile to the SS.
To a man, start shouting for his head. They should have their backsides torn open as wide as they open their mouths. So much for the Eastern Front. The shit that stinks to high heaven, the real shit, is that we are not only to cope with the Bolsheviks in the front line, but to cope with the bastard Bolsheviks at home inside the government.
Delmer borrowed the coarse language of Workers' Challenge to titillate his audience, then went further. He used sex stories to keep his listeners hooked.
We wrote and rendered real pornographic pieces because it was Delmer's idea, and probably he was right, that what is in German called das Frontschwein, the war pig, the simple man who is in the mud, in the front line, likes to hear a juicy story.
And now some information about the swinish, filthy tricks the enemy are using to try extract information from our boys in the Luftwaffe, who have been unlucky enough to be shot down and captured. When the usual methods of interrogation fail, some of our airmen have been stripped naked and tied to the floor in a gymnasium at the interrogation center. While they're in this humiliating position, a young and beautiful woman is sent into the room. Our reports say that invariably the woman has long hair. This young woman is only partly dressed.
That sort of thing people weren't used to. And so one comrade would say to the other, "Unbelievable, have you heard this thing? Some pig is on the air telling absolutely 100% dirty and funny, dirty stories." And we did real pornographic ones with no other purpose than making ourselves known.
Then positions herself on the gymnastic bar above the prison. She then swings herself over the bar and lets down her long hair, and then she trails her soft hair back and forward, over the naked bodies of our young airmen. After some minutes of this, some prisoners will babble anything.
We took great care not to let it seem that the chef himself enjoyed the bawdy details. Never, never did he let on that he was retelling these salty scandals to make his listeners eager to listen to his next harangue.
We must be strong and not give in to this filthy, perverted treatment. Say nothing.
Brilliantly done. Well done. The English thought the Germans liked that. The party members listening to GS1, also Gustav Siegfried 1, yeah, they liked it. Blood, sex, and crime is always interesting.
They were trying to establish an audience for the kind of subversive stuff they wanted to put over, the kind of stuff which, above all, would lead to the dissemination of rumors. rumours which would affect the individual German's will to fight, make him cast doubts, ask questions, and so on.
Rumours lay at the heart of Britain's propaganda war. Author and historian Christy Campbell is an expert on the workings of what was known as the Underground Rumour Committee, with whom Delmer worked closely.
The PWE, the Political Warfare Executive, saw rumours, the spreading of rumours, as a key way of attacking the enemy morale. Very little was off bounds. And the rumour gave the broadcast and the printed work that buzz of reality.
Britain coordinated radio and leaflets with agents sent to spread rumours behind enemy lines. A directive recommended that sex should be included to help rumours spread.
C259. Following the mobilisation of German boys from 12 to 16 for factory work, there has been a considerable increase in the number of indictments for pederasty among SS home troops. The group of necrophiles among SS troops in Berlin has assembled a perfect German girl from the severed legs, arms and torso of air raid victims.
But it was Delmer's sex broadcasts which proved too much for some. An English translation of Der Chef was leaked to the Lord Privy Seal, Sir Stafford Cripps. When he read Der Chef's account of an orgy involving a German admiral, his mistress, 4 sailors, and a helmet, he went to the Foreign Secretary, Anthony Eden, to have the Chef broadcasts stopped. Cripps accused Delmer's lies and beastly pornography of undermining what the British democratic state was fighting for, and said, "If this is the sort of thing that is needed to win the war, why, I'd rather lose it." This crisis over the morality of Delmer's broadcasts threatened to end his operation just as it had begun.
Gustav Siegfried I, that was scandal, because that was sex in its worst form, pornography of its worst, but was sent.
Whatever the government's reservations about the pornographic nature of Gustav Siegfried I, Delmer was not stopped. Instead, he was given the chance to further broaden his empire and coordinate his efforts with leaflets. Delmer didn't want his leaflets to look like British propaganda. He wanted leaflets that looked German. Erlich Howe was the master forger who could make them. And Erlich's secret weapon was that he had found, buried in the Monotype Corporation's vault, the exact typeface used by the Third Reich for its own official documents. Here was the forger's secret weapon. With this, and a team of artists and printers, he and Delmer were able to make leaflets that were far more subversive because they could pass themselves off as German. One of Delmer's first projects was to attack the image of the SS, to change it from ultimate defenders of the Reich to portray them instead as debased, self-serving, and corrupt. To do this, Delmer created a document which purported to detail a court-martial of 2 SS officers who, Delmer decided, had raped and murdered a woman, a case entirely made up by Delmer. The leaflet was carefully designed to appear as if it came from inside Germany, from patriotic Germans appalled by the SS. The leaflet gave a verbatim transcript of Delmer's invented trial. Readers discovered how, on the 14th of March, SS Lieutenant Kurt Brunauer and SS Lieutenant Frank Hertog took female auxiliaries into their quarters and induced them to sexual excess, in the course of which the auxiliary Ilse Hagmann lost her life.
The propaganda of the SS brochure is to give evidence of a split between the SS and the army, and to make the SS appear the main internal enemy of Germany.
Delmer spiced up the politics with perversity. His invented SS men, drunk on expensive liqueurs, had stuffed their victim's vagina with ice and caviar. The political punch of his sex story was that the SS could get away with it. The document showed that they had been acquitted. Delmer was quite clear about what his propaganda must achieve.
We must talk to him about his Führer and his fatherland and all that sort of thing, and at the same time inject some item of news into his mind, which will make him think and, if possible, act in a way that is contrary to the efficient conduct of Hitler's war.
As far as Delmer was concerned, this was total war, and civilian morale was a legitimate target.
I must warn you that in my unit we are up to all the dirty tricks we can devise. No holds barred. The dirtier the better. Lies, treachery, everything.
Delmer's next assignment was to widen his attack from the SS to foreign workers in an attempt to stoke up racial hatred.
Germany's manpower position today is more critical than that of any other belligerent nation. Germany's military destiny turns on her ability to replace the men destroyed in battle.
The Allies knew that manpower was critical to the German war machine. The question for Delmer was how to turn the dull facts into damaging propaganda. Delmer realized here was a regime obsessed with racial purity, but needing the very foreigners it despised to fill its factories back home. He decided to use their racism against them.
Today there are more than 10 million sexed up randy foreigners in all parts of the country, and your wives feel lonely. Throw the foreign workers out. End the war.
While Delmer wrote the text, Isabel, his wife, found herself recruited to do the art.
One I much enjoyed was a picture of a foreign worker making love to a bright blonde German girl. Life with black propaganda was quite strange. It was great fun. Fancy being employed by the government to create pornography.
Once again, Delmer used sex to stick his message home.
In politics, in war, and in love, all is allowed. And sex is a very important factor. And fantasy is a power station. A distant realm of vast eternity.
The whole operational aim of this campaign is to undermine the morale of German troops in occupied territories, to impress indelibly upon their minds that things at home have reached the stage where their presence is urgently required, if they are going to preserve their wives and daughters from being raped and used as slaves in factories.
Now, think of the situation at the front. A soldier is fighting there, sitting in his trench, and life is not very amusing. And all of a sudden he gets leaflets with sex, with naked women and all this stuff. And then his fantasy begins to work.
To rub the point home, there was an accompanying rumor.
N-675. Foreign workers in Essen have a sweepstake competition to see who can seduce the largest number of wives of German soldiers at the front.
And the effect is, he doesn't like war. He wants to go home, wants to go to his girlfriend.
And it worked, as a secret memo of the time shows.
We have had comeback on H714. I thought you would like to know that your pornography is getting around all right.
British forgeries were so successful that the Germans put out a leaflet warning against them. Britain's response? To forge their anti-forgeries leaflet. It was decided that for this forgery they would tamper with a picture of Hitler himself, to mock and ridicule the Führer, and show how his Nazi bureaucrats could do nothing to stop it. Delmer hired Marion Whitehorn, an innocent 22-year-old student, for the job.
I was ushered into the brigadier's office. I don't know who it was, but you know, he had red tabs, so I guessed he was a brigadier or some such. And he said that, to me that I'd come into a highly secret organization, and if I ever divulged a single word or talked to anybody about it, it would be at least 10 years hard labor, with lots of people, some in uniform, some not. And they were terribly serious, and, you know, not even a sort of cough or anything. And they passed round a postcard, you know, like that, total silence, until they got to me. And it was a postcard of Hitler, and the caption read, "What we have, we hold," translation from the German. And I looked at it, and I looked up, and he said, "Marion, I want you to put a penis between his fingers." Down, didn't know where to look. I mean, today, of course, I would have laughed like a drain, but then, you know, it was over 60 years ago. You know, one didn't behave like that. I looked up, and he said, "But not too big, Marion." Oh, dear. Well, I go down in history for having done that.
He is beating you.
By 1943, the Navy was fighting an increasingly desperate battle against the U-boats. It felt it needed its own disinformation to counter German propaganda and to demoralize the U-boatmen.
Are thinking.
So they turned to Delmer, who seized the opportunity to raise the propaganda stakes. And on the 22nd of March, 1943, 19-year-old Agnes Burnell became the voice of Atlantic Sender.
Gute Nacht, Fräulein Ursula Hase, und all meinen Freunden alles Gute und einen schönen guten Nachtkuss von Vicky.
This is Vicky speaking, saying hello to all our friends in the Wehrmacht. It shouldn't take us long to get acquainted. Not if we take it easy. Just imagine, you and I at a tiny table for two, a glass of Riesling. My eyes look into yours, and in the background.
Look, everything what is forbidden is interesting, yeah?
Horst Bredow, watch officer of U-boat 288, remembers very well listening to Vicky on Atlantic Sender.
I remember that she had an erotic voice, and a lot of our sailors said, "Oh," you know what I mean?
Have you ever seen a picture of Vicky?
No.
Shall I show you one?
You have one?
Yeah.
I can get it? I can make a copy?
I'll give you a copy, yes.
Oh, thank you. Oh, look. She's nice. If there would be television aboard of U-boats and they saw these pictures, maybe a lot of them would say, the war is finished, I go over to the English girls. No, that was a joke. Please excuse me.
Now the music changes. You stand up, tall and handsome. Will you dance, you say? I smile and move into your arms, and we glide off together.
With Atlantic Center, Delmer put another of his rules of propaganda into practice. That propaganda relied entirely on telling the truth. Only by having a reputation for truth and accuracy could you slip the lie by. The black heart of Atlantic Sender was to be intelligence. Atlantic Sender was to be the U-boatman's friend, but a false friend, because the station had a darker mission.
The trump cards with music first, jazz with a German flair and flavor, and news, of course. The intelligence was excellent. Much better than the German intelligence.
The armed services gave Delmer access to their intelligence gleaned from interrogating captured U-boatmen. They even got special intelligence specifically for him. One of the naval interrogators who got Delmer's intelligence was Charles Wheeler.
Really important stuff was to try and find out what the latest German technological innovations were. And in addition to that, we were, as a sideline, collecting information for the propaganda services, for the black radio stations, for example. And we would, if we had a prisoner who might not be willing to talk about radar, but he might be able to might be willing to tell you where he went in the evenings when he went ashore.
There's a whorehouse on a hill.
And we'd collect this information in as much detail as possible. The names of the whores in the local whorehouse that they used to go to, all this sort of thing. And pass this on down the line to the propaganda people who would then incorporate it in their programs.
It was for us a real miracle what they sometimes knew about us. They knew our names, they knew our birthdays, they knew the birthdays of our mother and father and so on, so that we thought they knew everything. The not so intelligent people, then they made their smear campaign against Germany or against the German Navy or against the German U-boats. Then they said, when they knew this, maybe that is also right.
You know, if you imagine you're sitting in a U-boat base in France, and you're listening to one of these black radio stations, and you suddenly find that they know all about the base, they know about the whorehouses, they know about the bars, they know names of officers in that base, and so on. You suddenly think, my God, you know, we're infiltrated. There's spies in here. So that it gives the black radio program credibility.
I smile and move into your arms, and we glide off together, our hearts dancing in time to I love you truly.
Delmer used sex and music to lure his listener, intelligence about their private lives to impress them.
Ah, it's wonderful to be dancing like this.
And then yet more intelligence, this time from the Air Force, to inject his poison. The Air Force let him see the reconnaissance photos of that evening's air raid as soon as they came in. By comparing them with maps of the cities, his team was able to compile lists of the streets and even individual houses that had been bombed.
Leimbacher Straße, Dijonstraße, Klingelhall, Schützenstraße numbers 58 to 98, Bürgerallee.
U-boatmen would suddenly hear the name of their street read out.
Drosselweg between number 12 and 44, Katzenhof, Mozartweg, Finkenstraße, Steinhofstraße und Kettengasse.
I'm a Berlin boy, yeah? I come from Berlin. My home, Marienfelde, Daimler-Benz. That was a big plant, big firm. Yeah, we lived about 1.5 kilometers from Daimler-Benz.
Da hab ich mich willig dir hingegeben.
And I remember correcting the Hamburg ones, which was horrendous. It named every number of every street all over Hamburg. And it got longer and longer and longer.
Meine Damen und Herren, reports have just come in of a raid in progress over Cologne. The entire south side of the city is on fire.
We would sometimes describe the raid as if it was still going on, with harrowing eyewitness accounts of men and women and children being caught up in the melting asphalt.
His brave firefighters are risking their lives to save innocent lives.
The U-boatmen would never know if their loved ones were among the living or the dead.
So we have been anxious, happened something to my house, happened something to my family. That made anxious, that gave some inner problems, you know.
Du hast mich gehabt, mich von Sinnen gebracht. Ich glaubte, ich könnte nicht ohne dich leben.
And the leaflets too carried the same message. Leaflets showing the faces of women and children from the morgue were dropped on the U-boat home bases.
I enjoyed the dancing and the wine and the romancing. Now, until I meet you again,
Sex
to my spinster
and death.
Good night, comrades.
Vicky and mutilated bodies.
Good luck.
This was the poison in Delmer's cocktail.
Propagandists don't know a Genevan Convention, for instance, to do this, of course. To me, Delmer said sometimes, there's no Geneva Convention in black propaganda. All is allowed. Deception, lies, subversive propaganda and all these things. Nasty things, of course. He was the king of nasty things without any doubt, yeah.
By 1944, the war had entered its last, most vicious stage. America had joined, and the Germans were everywhere in retreat.
In autumn 1944, most of the German officers were convinced that the war was lost. And the political leadership knew that, of course. Goebbels knew that.
Yet they did not give up. Instead, the SS, Delmer's old adversary, took over, under the leadership of Gunther Dalken, and their orders were clear.
Do all you can, by leaflets, by radio broadcasts, and so on, to win time. I asked Dalken, and he answered, believe it or not, we thought that we needed 2 or 3 months. And then the new weapons would decide the war. New weapons, of course, rockets with nuclear warheads. We needed urgently 3, 4, or 6 weeks. And all is allowed to get this done. In other words, the propagandists were the prominent victims of their own propaganda. That's quite funny, isn't it?
To play for time, the Germans unleashed the greatest barrage of sex leaflets ever seen. And it was based on a simple, if brutal, message. Even if your side is winning, if you are killed or crippled, you have lost.
Don't be killed on the battlefield. Stay where you are. It is absolutely nonsense to be killed when a war is won.
To convince the Allied soldier to surrender, or at least slow his advance, the Germans mixed sex with death more directly than ever before, and moved from mere drawings to photography to make it seem more real. On one side, a sex parody of Life magazine, on the other, death.
The Germans, toward the end of the war, really produced a lot of sex leaflets. Some of them very, very good. The Life and Death series is an excellent series. There was about 16 of them produced in all, in different sizes, and full size and miniature, showing either British Tommy helmets on the girls or American, which kind of showed you who they were aimed at.
German leaflets and propaganda radio taunted the soldier,
Hello, boys. American boys.
saying if he died, his allies, his officers, even his friends safe back home would enjoy what he had foolishly lost.
So nice to come home to. Hello, boys. Who are you thinking are boys? Irene? Jane? Sylvia? Where are they tonight? Wouldn't they be so nice to come home to? Or is that foreign friend of yours coming home to them tonight?
And finally they used every soldier's fear of mutilation.
This leaflet is, in my opinion, quite interesting. And if you turn it over, gentlemen prefer blondes, but blondes don't like cripples.
You talk to any man in the front line, they'll say, you know, I don't mind dying, but I don't want to go back a cripple or scarred or disfigured. And the Germans played on that a lot.
You are sitting in a trench and you get this leaflet. I must survive. I must get out of this war. Not as a cripple, but safe and sound.
While the SS were hammering away at the front-line soldier, Delmer, ever cleverer and more insidious, had found a softer target, the soldiers' families back home. The so-called dead letters marked one of Delmer's darkest projects. These were letters which came from German families who were simply not able to accept that their sons or husbands were dead, and continued to write to them as if they were alive, giving them all the news from home.
Your sister Erna is married. She has a little boy now, named Martin after you. Think of it, dear Martin. You are an uncle now. Do let us hear from you soon, dear boy.
Delmer asked to have these letters and wrote back, telling them their son was alive.
Dear Frau, please make no inquiries about the whereabouts of Martin. He is safe and well in a neutral country with a good job. Other comrades are with him. When this terrible war Hitler caused is ended, he will either return to you or send for you. He asks me to send his best greetings to you and Anna, and hopes you are well.
The only signature was a red circle. It was posted in Germany. These were the letters that really horrified me as a child. I'd have been about 9 or 10, probably a little bit older than Zoe. I'd been learning about Germany at school, and I'd read a book written from a child's point of view about life in Germany during the war, and it horrified me to feel that my father was making their lives even sadder, and I was horrified. And I said, yeah, but the letters and the things you did were so wrong. And he said, yes, they were wrong, but it had to be done. He was proud of the effect, but he wasn't proud of what he had done.
Oh, he had a conscience, yes. Yes, he had a conscience. But he was a journalist. And he reported the story and was the story. And in that sense, you park your conscience at the door, as a bomber pilot would as about to unleash a load of bombs on Berlin.
For 4 years, Delmer had given everything to his war work. Then, just before D-Day itself, Delmer's war took its revenge. Isabel, his wife, left him.
I behaved normally at the office, but on leaving would start crying. I knew I had to leave because I could not face his way of life for the indefinite future. I did not want to marry anyone else at that time. Of these weeks I remember only a weight of misery which nearly crushed me.
But I think it was the war that pulled them apart. Yes, there was a huge attraction, but there was also a need for each to run their own life. And Isabel was really bound up in the arts. Pa enjoyed the arts but wasn't truly bound up in it. I don't think it was, I don't like what you're doing. I think we're doing different things. She needed to be loved and needed. And I think Pa probably got very, very bound up in his war work.
But whatever Delmer had done, in the final months of the war, it was the Americans who had learnt their trade from Delmer, who unleashed the most apocalyptic sex propaganda.
Confuse them, divide them, panic them, strike at their discipline, flatten them with bombs and atoms, spray them with gunfire, burn them with flamethrowers, and make the whole job easier by the use of morale operations.
The very famous 6 builder leaflets that were produced by the OSS in Rome are just the most terrible kind of sexual leaflets with bestiality and homosexuality. And just terrible, terrible things. And yet I talked to the fellow that drew them, very literate, very intelligent man who did those leaflets in the style of the German poetry, the old German author poetry of the time, very classically and formally written. And he told me, well, the pictures were nothing. It was just to get him to hold it in the hand. I wanted him to think, is it possible that my son could be taken advantage of by a Hitler Youth leader? Is it possible that my wife is so lonely that she'd go to another woman? And it was curious, but the sex really was meaningless to him. It just was something that they threw on there just to catch the attention.
In 6 years of fighting, the propaganda war had escalated from coy nudes to the extremes of sexual violence, pornography, and death. In a war where everything had been allowed, a total war, his war, Delmer had won. But at what cost?
Vicky speaking.
I gazed into the mirror with all the horror of Dorian Gray confronting his telltale portrait. There, staring at me, was the pallid, flabby-mouthed face of a crook. Was this, I asked myself, what 4 years of black had done to Sefton Delmer?
There's more on the psychological warfare of World War II at channel4.com/history. It was a turning point in the Falklands conflict, but remains one of the most controversial aspects of Margaret Thatcher's premiership. Secret History tells a far from straightforward story in Sink the Belgrano, next Monday at 9 o'clock. Next tonight, a virtual hop on the couch for the housemates from the Big Brother psychologists.